A war-torn alien world stands on the edge of extinction. Two ancient factions, one final standoff, and a single human caught in the middle. But this isn't a tale of battles and weapons. It's a story of trust, courage, and an impossible peace brokered not with firepower, but with connection. When Captain Jonas Merrill steps onto Kydros, he's not just fighting to end a war. He's about to rewrite the future of an entire planet. And it all begins with one ancient ritual and two mysterious alien sisters who just might change everything. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move toward this wonderful story. The transport shuttle landed with a low, exhausted hum, its engines coughing against the dust-heavy wind of Kydros. The skies were dim with clouded light, and the horizon wore a haze of smoke that had settled in like an unwanted guest. Captain Jonas Merrill stepped onto the cracked landing pad, his boots crunching on broken stone and scorched debris. The air stung his nose, a bitter mix of ash, metal, and the faint scent of something chemical. War had touched this planet, and it hadn't been gentle. Jonas adjusted the straps on his gear and took in the view around him. The spaceport, once a proud beacon for trade and diplomacy, now looked like a graveyard. Pieces of old shuttles and cargo pods lay in heaps, their surfaces blackened by explosions. Beyond the ruined port, the capital city stretched in jagged lines, broken towers like snapped bones piercing the gray sky. The wind carried the silence of abandonment, a quiet louder than any battle cry. Jonas had seen many war zones in his years as a peacekeeper and soldier, but Kydros carried a kind of sadness that went beyond destruction. It felt like the planet itself had given up hope. A group approached from the shadows of a half-collapsed terminal. Three figures in long cloaks, the cloth worn thin and stained with ash. The tallest stepped forward. His skin had a silver-blue tone, his eyes bright like polished stone despite the weariness in his movements. "Captain Jonas Merrill," he said with a tired bow. "Welcome to Kydros. I am Lurel, royal advisor to His Grace, Prince Kalen of the Skyborn clans." Jonas returned a respectful nod. "Heard you've got yourselves quite the conflict here." Lurel gave a short, grim smile. "We had a home, now we have a battlefield. We asked for a miracle. Command sent us a man." "I'm not a miracle," Jonas said plainly. "I'm a man with a brain, a few good instincts, and no patience for needless bloodshed." They moved through the broken terminal together, the sound of their footsteps echoing over shattered tiles. As they walked, Lurel explained the situation. Kydros was once a thriving world, ruled jointly by the Skyborn clans of the north and the Deep Vale Union of the south. Two cultures different in tradition but once united in purpose. But years ago, a resource dispute turned political, and politics turned into open warfare. Now both factions were entrenched in a civil war with no end in sight. Neither side strong enough to win, both powerful enough to destroy everything. "What made them call for help now?" Jonas asked, eyes scanning the ruins for signs of life or danger. Lurel hesitated. "The Deep Vale has developed a weapon, a planet cracker. Our scientists say it can boil half a continent. If they use it, we will respond in kind. The end of, the war will also be the end of Kydros." Jonas stopped walking and looked the advisor in the eye. "You're sitting on a matchstick house, both sides holding fire, and you want me to blow out the candle before it burns everything down?" Lurel nodded. "That is a poetic way to put it. But yes." They reached a black transport glider, sleek and silent, waiting to take them to the palace. From above, the city looked even worse. Roads carved apart by shelling, craters where schools once stood, and refugee camps filling what had once been marketplaces. Jonas stared out of the window, jaw tight. This wasn't just a war zone. This was a planet on the edge of giving up. The palace, or what remained of it, stood on a mountain ridge, tall enough to overlook the crumbled remains of the capital. It had once been a work of beauty, built of shimmering white stone and carved glass. Now it looked weary, like a king who had seen too much. Jonas stepped out of the glider and followed Lurel through the main corridor. Despite the damage, parts of the palace were still standing. Tapestries hung half-burnt, and the soft hum of power could still be heard from deeper within. They arrived at the throne room. It was vast, open, and surprisingly intact. At its center stood Prince Kalen. His posture was proud, but the dark rings under his eyes gave away his exhaustion. He wore traditional robes of the Skyborn, though they were clearly mended many times over. Flanking him were two women, tall, graceful, and striking. Their skin shimmered in soft violet hues, their expressions unreadable. Captain Merrill, the prince greeted, stepping forward. "You've come far." "I've seen farther," Jonas replied, "but I've never seen a war this close to tipping into total ruin." "Then you understand our need," Kalen said. "We did not call for weapons, we called for perspective. They say humans are unpredictable, that you see paths others miss." Jonas's eyes narrowed as he looked at the prince, then to the women. One of them gave a subtle smile. He wasn't sure if it was welcoming or testing. "I see paths," Jonas said, "but walking them requires trust. Do you think your people are ready to try something they haven't in years?" Kalen looked to the women, then back at Jonas. "They will have to be, because this is our final chance." As the throne room doors closed behind them, Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would test more than just his negotiation skills. It would test his heart, his limits, and everything he thought he knew about peace. The next morning, the palace was quiet in a way that made Jonas uneasy. Soldiers in muted armor stood at the gates, heads bowed, hands resting on weapons they hoped they wouldn't need. Inside, the halls were dimly lit with soft, golden light that flickered against the damaged walls. Jonas moved through them slowly, feeling the weight of eyes watching him, some curious, some cautious, none entirely trusting. He couldn't blame them. He was a stranger, a human outsider brought in to do what their own leaders had failed to do, stop a war that had already taken everything from them. At breakfast, Jonas sat alone at a long stone table in a garden that still smelled of smoke. It was there that the sisters arrived. Seren moved like a thought, quiet, deliberate, graceful. Her long white hair shimmered faintly in the morning sun, and her calm expression carried the weight of someone used to listening more than speaking. Alira was different. She entered like a gust of wind, sharp-eyed and direct, her voice warm but teasing. The sisters were daughters of Prince Kalen's older brother, now deceased. Orphaned by the war, they had stayed close to the court, offering counsel and helping keep the traditions of the Skyborn people alive. "You're eating alone," Alira said, sitting across from him without waiting for an invitation. Serene followed and gave him a small nod. "Is that a choice or a consequence?" Jonas raised an eyebrow. "I guess I didn't ask for company." "Sometimes," Seren said softly, "company shows up whether we ask or not." They didn't touch their food. Instead, they studied him, as if he were part of the strategy they'd been trained to read. Jonas tried not to squirm under their gaze. He'd faced warlords, pirates, and smugglers, but there was something about these two that unsettled him. Not in a threatening way, more in a way he didn't quite understand yet. "We're to assist you," Seren said. "Our culture has rituals for peace building. You'll need guidance." "Don't take it personally," Alira added. "But most humans wouldn't last 5 minutes in a Kadrian council without offending someone." Jonas chuckled. "I'll take the help. I'm not here to impress anyone, just stop the bleeding." Alira leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with interest. "Then let's see what you can handle." Later that day, they brought him to a ceremonial chamber deep within the palace. It was circular, with walls carved in patterns that told stories of Kadros's history, times of union, festivals, and ancient gatherings. At the center was a low table surrounded by cushions. The sisters explained that this was a place used for the binding rites, an old tradition meant to build trust between enemies through shared presence, contact, and stories. "Everything here is meant to lower defenses," Seren said, adjusting a small incense burner that gave off a calming scent. "Physical closeness, shared meals, laughter, music. It's designed to make people feel safe." Jonas nodded. "And you want me to test it out?" "You'll need to understand it," Alira said, already stepping into the space and sitting cross-legged on one of the cushions. Because when the time comes, you'll be the one leading it. Jonas followed, not entirely sure what he was stepping into. Seren joined them, her movements smooth and deliberate. She poured him a cup of tea, her fingers brushing his. It was a small thing, but he noticed it. Noticed the softness of her touch, the way her eyes lingered a second longer than needed. What happens in these sessions? He asked. Talk. Listen, sometimes silence, Seren answered. The purpose is to be present without defenses. And physical closeness? He asked, glancing at Alira, who had moved closer. Our people believe that trust isn't only in words, she said. It's in shared space. Proximity matters, warmth matters. They sat like that for a while, talking about the war, about other worlds Jonas had seen, and about traditions that no longer made sense to a divided people. The sisters shared memories of a time before the war, when both factions celebrated together and children played in the same markets. Jonas felt something shift as they spoke, not just in the air, but inside him. He was beginning to understand that this conflict wasn't just about politics or land. It was about grief, about people who had forgotten what it meant to trust. That night, Jonas returned to his quarters feeling unsettled. The sisters had challenged him, not with arguments, but with kindness, with presence. They'd looked at him not as a hired outsider, but as someone who might belong here, if only he was brave enough to try. The next day, the lessons continued. They taught him greetings that involved subtle gestures and customs that required touch, fingers, to wrists, hands on shoulders, embraces that were more symbolic than romantic but intimate all the same. Jonas, who had spent years in the business of conflict, found himself drawn into something softer and more delicate than he'd ever expected. Serene's calm voice began to feel like music. Alira's laughter echoed in his mind long after she left the room. Their presence felt familiar now, comforting. And yet, a part of him warned that letting his guard down too much could be dangerous. Not because of them, but because of what he might begin to feel. Trust and temptation, he realized, were not far apart. And as the sisters stood with him in the training chamber one evening, hands resting lightly on his arms as they guided him through the final steps of the ritual, Jonas understood something he hadn't before. This mission wasn't just about stopping a war. It was about building something lasting, something human, alien and fragile, and perhaps something worth staying for. The Great Hall hadn't been used in decades. It sat on the edge of the highlands, far from the capital, untouched by battle but not by time. Dust coated the carved stone floors and ivy crept through the cracked windows. Yet there was something peaceful about the place. It had once been sacred, a site of ancient gatherings where different clans of Kadros would meet to share stories, solve disputes, and renew old promises. Now, for the first time in a generation, the hall would witness something new, the Harmony Assembly. Jonas stood at the center of the room, surrounded by quiet workers setting cushions in a perfect circle. The fire bowls had been lit, casting soft golden light across the hall. Everything had been prepared according to the customs Serene and Alira had taught him. The colors of both factions, skyborn blue and deep veil green, were woven into the fabric that hung from the walls. The food, the music, even the placement of seating was carefully arranged to avoid giving one side dominance over the other. Every detail mattered. The smallest mistake could be read as a slight. The mood had to be perfect. The sisters moved through the hall with calm purpose, checking details, correcting placements, offering last-minute instructions. Jonas admired their balance, Serene's quiet patience, Alira's bold clarity. They were the heart of this effort. He was just the bridge between them and the world beyond. "Are you ready?" Alira asked him as she passed by, adjusting his sash with a firm tug. "Ready as I'll ever be," Jonas replied, though his stomach twisted with nerves. He had been in firefights, hostage rescues, political standoffs. But this felt riskier, because this wasn't just about strategy. It was about emotions, fear, pride, pain, and bringing them all into the same room. As the guests began to arrive, the air shifted. First came General Corrin of the Skyborn, a tall, battle-scarred leader whose presence filled the doorway. His sharp eyes swept the room, landing on Jonas with a look of thinly veiled doubt. A moment later, Admiral Riva of the Deep Veil entered, dressed in elegant robes, her face calm but unreadable. She gave a respectful nod to Jonas and an almost imperceptible glance toward Corrin. The factions were here. The war in human form had just stepped into the circle. Jonas stepped forward. "Welcome. Thank you for coming. This gathering is not a negotiation. It is not a debate. It is a return to something older, a moment to sit together, not as enemies, but as people." "No one," replied. The silence pressed down like a storm cloud. Following tradition, Jonas offered each of them a small cup of spiced tea, brewed from local herbs said to calm the spirit. They accepted cautiously, exchanging a glance as they drank. Then he offered a piece of bread to each of them, an act of shared nourishment. Slowly, the ceremony began. At first, the conversation was stiff, polite words, forced topics, long pauses. Corrin made a sharp comment. Riva responded with a diplomatic smile that barely concealed her frustration. Jonas worried that things were already falling apart. But then Seren began to speak, not about the war but about a song their mother used to sing at gatherings long ago. Alira picked up the melody, her voice soft and clear. It echoed through the hall like a memory. Corrin blinked slowly. "That song? My sister used to hum that when she worked in the fields." Riva nodded. "My grandfather played it on a wood flute. I thought it was a Deep Veil tune. Maybe it was both," Alira said gently. A shift occurred. Not dramatic, but real. The mood began to soften. Jonas suggested they share personal stories, moments before the war, what they had loved, what they had lost. Slowly, one by one, they spoke. Corrin told of his daughter's laughter echoing through the mountain halls. Reva shared how her brother had vanished during the first battle, his body never found. Even the guards, sitting nearby, leaned in without realizing it. The firelight flickered as emotions rose. Not anger this time, but grief, nostalgia, and a strange, delicate hope. Then came the final stage of the ritual. Jonas, flanked by Seren and Alira, invited the group to form the circle of trust. It was the oldest part of the Harmony Assembly, where participants sat shoulder to shoulder with no barriers, sharing warmth and presence. It wasn't about words anymore. It was about being near someone you once called an enemy and choosing not to flinch. At first they hesitated, but Jonas sat down, cross-legged between them. He reached out his hands, offering one to Corrin and one to Riva. After a long pause, they took them. The others followed. The circle formed. For a long time, no one spoke. And then something extraordinary happened. Corrin looked across the circle and said, "I don't want my grandchildren to inherit my enemies." Riva responded, "Neither do I. It was that simple, not a treaty, not a surrender. Just an honest truth between two weary people who had nothing left to lose except more lives." When the ritual ended, no one rushed to leave. They sat in the glow of the fire, surrounded by music and the scent of healing herbs. For the first time, in years, Skyborn and Deep Veil had shared something other than pain. Jonas stood slowly, his knees sore, but his heart full. Seren touched his shoulder. Alira gave him a rare, quiet smile. "You did it," Seren whispered. "No," Jonas said, looking around the room. "We all did." Outside, the wind still howled through the Cadrian cliffs. But inside the hall, something fragile and beautiful had been born. Hope. 5 years had passed since the Harmony Assembly, but to Jonas Merrill, it still felt like yesterday. The highlands of Kadros, once scarred by war, now bloomed with color. New cities had risen from the ashes, and the once abandoned ceremonial halls now rang with music, laughter, and stories shared across former battle lines. Peace had not come easily, and it was still not perfect, but it was real. That alone was a miracle. Jonas stood on a balcony overlooking the capital of Saraveth, the new joint city built by both the Skyborn clans and the Deepvale Union. From here, he could see the flowing river that marked the old border between the two factions, now bridged by gardens, schools, and shared markets. Below, people of both sides moved through the streets together, not as enemies but as neighbors. Children ran through open courtyards, their skin a mix of colors, their laughter unburdened by history. Behind him, light footsteps echoed on the smooth stone. Serene approached first, her long cloak fluttering behind her, her calm smile unchanged despite the years. Alira followed, holding the hands of two small children, a boy and a girl. Both bore the subtle traits of their parents, Jonas's brown eyes, Serene's smooth features, and Alira's spark of mischief. The children looked up at their father with wide smiles before racing past him toward the garden. Luma's already trying to outsmart the gardeners, Alira said with a laugh, and Kalen insists he can fly if he runs fast enough. He gets that from you, Jonas replied, watching the kids disappear into the greenery. The confidence, I mean. Seren leaned against his shoulder, her voice soft. And the stubbornness, from you. It's a dangerous combination. Jonas smiled but didn't speak. He watched the horizon in silence for a while. Ships from other worlds dotted the sky, their shimmering trails cutting across the blue like brushstrokes. Kadros had become a symbol of hope in the galaxy. Other war-torn planets now sent delegations to study the peace process that Jonas and the Kadrians had helped build. His role had grown over time, from a simple mediator to what they now called the Planetary Steward, a title that sounded too grand for what he truly did: help people see one another clearly again. A soft chime echoed from inside the palace. Seren glanced toward the door. The delegation from Thessa just landed. They're here early. Of course they are, Jonas muttered. No one shows up late when they want you to fix a war. Alira gave him a look. They asked for you by name. That's becoming a trend I didn't expect, he replied. I thought I'd go back to my old life after the assembly. Travel a little, maybe disappear quietly. You tried, Seren said. For about 1 week. Jonas chuckled. It was true. He'd spent years running from commitments, from politics, from any kind of permanence. But here, on this strange world with its ancient customs and quiet wisdom, he had found everything he never knew he needed. A family, a purpose, a legacy that might just outlive him. As they walked toward the palace entrance, their children trailing, behind with half-picked flowers, Jonas thought about how far they had come. The old throne room had been transformed into a diplomatic hall, where leaders from across the stars now came not to threaten or bargain, but to learn. The great banners of Skyborn blue and Deepvale green still hung side by side, joined now by a third color, silver, the symbol of unity. Inside, the delegation waited. Jonas recognized the tension in their postures, the tightness in the shoulders, the way they avoided each other's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen so many times, two sides too proud to admit how much they'd lost. He stepped forward, not with power but with calm confidence. He greeted them with the traditional Kedrian gesture, hands open, palms up, an invitation to speak without weapons. As he welcomed them, his children peeked in from behind a column. Luma giggled. Kalen waved proudly as if already certain of his father's success. Jonas smiled and waved back. The delegation followed his gaze. Your family? One of them asked. Yes, Jonas said simply. My family, and the reason I do this. There was a pause, then a softening. Maybe that was all it took sometimes. Proof. That peace was not just possible but personal. Later that evening, long after the formal introductions had ended, Jonas sat beneath the stars with Seren and Alira. The children had fallen asleep between them, heads resting on his lap. The fire crackled nearby, casting gentle shadows on their faces. Do you ever miss it? Alira asked. The life before all this? Jonas shook his head slowly. No, I thought I would. But this, he looked at the sky, at the stars, now shining over a peaceful Kadros. This is better. Seren reached for his hand. The stars are watching us, you know. Maybe one day people will tell stories about this place. About you. Jonas laughed softly. Then let them tell the truth, that I didn't save a world alone. I found 2 women brave enough to trust me and a people strong enough to forgive. Alira leaned against him. That's a story worth passing down. The wind carried the scent of blooming flowers through the air. Peace, fragile but steady, had taken root. And in that quiet moment, under the stars, Jonas knew the legacy of Kadros wasn't just in treaties or titles, but in every laugh, every shared meal, every child who had never seen war. And somewhere in the stars someone else would be watching, listening, hoping they could do the same.